right, good evening, everybody. Dr. Mehta here with DOC Pain Management. Having one of our DOC talks and webinars this late afternoon. Hope everyone's enjoying the day. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I think we don't get enough time to discuss in the clinic setting, with you on a day-to-day basis. But hopefully, you guys understand the importance of nutrition, specifically how, the diet and what we are eating on a day-to-day basis can actually impact our inflammation and pain. And so, I think it's very important to understand how different foods, how different substances can both, help and not help your inflammation and pain. And hopefully you take away some of these tips to make an impact in your day-to-day life, on what you eat. And so, again, like these doc talks, everyone, they can stay on mute during the webinar, and then unmute yourself or chat in the box with any questions that come along the way. So, when we talk about inflammation, I think all of you know this by now, but inflammation really is the body's reaction to an injury or infection, right? Our natural response is that fight or flight response, our response to attack something that's not supposed to be there, and that's what inflammation is. Now, when we have acute inflammation, our body goes into protective mode. We want to really address that tissue damage and heal it in the fastest and quickest way possible. Same thing, once inflammation kind of continues on an ongoing basis, it does become chronic. And that's where it can be linked to the different syndromes that we talk about, arthritis and autoimmune issues, fibromyalgia. Those type of syndromes tend to be a reason for chronic inflammation. So, kind of just jumping on that as far as what conditions are linked to inflammation, right? It's any sort of fluid buildup that can happen over time. And so arthritis, which is wear and tear to the cartilage, that causes inflammation into the joints. You can have rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune condition where it's a systemic kind of blood infection that is causing a downstream effect of inflammation, right? So not your general wear and tear that we see with osteoarthritis. This is now a continued inflammation cascade that becomes harder to reverse without some adjuvant medications to help reverse the rheumatoid condition, or even outside, pro-inflammatory markers to reduce that inflammation. Fibromyalgia, I think that is one condition that tends to be this umbrella term where patients have widespread pain, right? They have periods of inflammation, periods of rest, and so the body's on overdrive that we consider in these patients with fibromyalgia, just a heightened sense of inflammation. Bursitis, tendonitis, if you have a tear in your rotator cuff, inflammatory markers just jump to that area, causes inflammation and elicits pain. And then as we talked about, different autoimmune disease, different chronic back pain syndromes, all is a culprit to inflammatory syndromes that definitely lead to pain. So where does diet come in, right? And so diet, has such an important role in how we feel. There's instances where you might notice yourself eating a sugary meal, or having too much caffeine at night, right? Those two things, just as an example, will affect the way your body feels during that day and even the next day. And so as you can imagine, diet has a huge impact on our day-to-day life. But now talk about diet and how it controls inflammation in our body. That is a big indicator of how we can, help reduce some of those chronic pain conditions that we just discussed. And so here are just a couple simple things and, evidence-based guidelines and tips of specific foods that do have a role in reducing inflammation. And so first, it's the Mediterranean rich diets. And, you've heard of these diets that have, high in omega-3s, so lots of fish, lots of oils, lots of olive oil, high in fibers like, nuts and legumes, and and things like that. A lot of plant-based material. So this Mediterranean diet really has a role in not only reducing inflammation, but it also has a role in reducing cardiac markers. And so if we just think of, why do we eat healthy? We try to eat healthy because we want to reduce, cardiac disease. But why do we develop cardiac disease? Cardiac disease is inflammation. It's inflammation in our arteries. So any sort of diet that would help promote good cardiac health or heart health, think about it, that's going to also improve our inflammation and our pain health. And so Mediterranean diets have been studied, worldwide and have been really um, a founding, leader in just reducing inflammation in our body. Plant-based diets. So plant-based diets, now we're talking lots of, vegetables, fruits, salads, those help um, reduce a lot of the microbiology in our gut, right? So not only are we eating the food, we need to process that food in the best way so that we absorb all the healthy nutrients and we're able to, waste all the unhealthy parts of that food. And so plant-based diets are easy to digest. We actually can get a lot of good natural substances from those foods that can help in turn reduce our inflammation. Fermented foods. So this is what we're talking about. A lot of the yogurts and dairies and things like that that have a lot of micro biology or probiotics that can really, again, same thing, improve a lot of your gut biology so that you can process that food better. And then finally, a lot of the omega-3s and fibers, like we talked about, the grains, the brown rice, things like that, that can really help support and reduce that inflammation. So here's again what we talked about. Um, omega-3s, those you can find in a lot of fish, a lot of nuts, you can find omega-3s in uh, a lot of oatmeal, rich foods like that, antioxidant rich foods. So a lot of like beets and pomegranate, those have really antioxidant properties. Fiber is your brown rice, your lentils. Those can really help. Spices are good. So things like turmeric really has a strong anti-inflammatory powder. It's a substance used in a lot of Indian food. And so it's something that you can get either in pill formation or even over the counter as a powder. And so that's something that can really, again, improve that inflammatory cascade. Fermented foods we talked about, like yogurts, and then, green tea. So green tea, I think, has a little bit of caffeine, but it does have a lot of properties to actually reduce inflammation in our body. And so if you're thinking about, hey, can I reduce that coffee intake, maybe I can't get rid of my caffeine, but green tea is a great substitute for that, where you can get a little bit of caffeine, plus you're getting the reduction in inflammation. I know if I have my first cup of coffee, but if I have my second cup of coffee at 2 o'clock, that will affect my whole nighttime routine. And so I've tried to switch that to something like green tea, where I can get that little caffeine intake plus reduce any sort of inflammation or irritation along the way. Foods that increase inflammation, right? So we talked about what foods can decrease inflammation. What foods are we eating that make things worse? So anything processed meats, right? Anything that is not fresh, goes through a huge processing cascade, and so naturally those meats and those foods are meant to last an extended period of time, right? And so, with that being said, there's extra things that are added that might not improve our body, right? So we have to be mindful of that. Refined carbohydrates and sugar. So these are like all your white breads, all your, potato chips, a lot of those things that, are rich in carbohydrates and sugars that we need to think about. Can we, not completely avoid? Can we limit them? Number one, and then can we substitute, right? So I think with any sort of lifestyle and healthy eating is cutting cold turkey, I think is hard and unrealistic. can we make some modifications along the way, right? Can we make some substitutes? Can we limit any of these pro-inflammatory types of foods? They will definitely help our long-term health, right? High sodium, so you want to avoid salt, you want to avoid added salts, you want to avoid fried and processed foods, and excessive alcohol, right? We know in general a lot of these conditions, a lot of these foods do increase inflammation, but in one way they can actually now worsen your pain. So, what are some tips that we have, hopefully that you can take away? A couple simple things is, fill your plate with colorful vegetables, right? So, I think a plate like this that you see here, lots of fruits and vegetables. To me, I'd say, where's the protein, right? So I would say, even half of this plate of fruits and vegetables, fibers is a great start. That's a great way to um, look at your dietary intake and say, okay, do I have a protein on a third of my plate? Do I have these colorful fruits and vegetables on a third of my plate? And then the other third, is there some sort of fiber, right? So you break up that plate into a third. And we're talking about in every meal. So we're talking about breakfast, lunch, and dinner, having that same concept of one third protein, one third fruits and vegetables, one third fiber, right? And so I think following that sort of one third rule, you're in great shape to having just improved healthy eating habits, but also now taking care of your body and your pain. Like we said, rich in omega threes, twice weekly. I'm not a big fish eater, but at the same token, you can even take omega-3 supplements, right? So you're still getting that added benefit of the omega-3s if you're not someone that wants to eat seafood in that frequent amount. We talked about different spices, so turmeric, ginger, those have great pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory properties, and so putting them in smoothies, they really don't have a strong taste to it, so you can mix it in a lot of foods and things and really get the benefits. Swap those sugary snacks with nuts or fruits and vegetables, right? So switching, instead of reaching for that candy bar, reaching for that, maybe switching it for something fresh. And so these are some simple tips that can definitely help you. The other thing is try to avoid eating late at night. Our body, we had a previous discussion about sleep. Our body needs to be the best accustomed to getting a good night's rest, right? We know getting a good night's sleep can reduce inflammation and provide our body to, recover. So what we're eating before we go to bed, can affect how our sleep is, right? So it's that cascade. So you're not really wanting to eat high sugars, high caffeine, high fatty foods before you go to bed. And so keeping that in mind, even if you are going to have a late night snack, right? We all you know, have that dinner and then we want a little late night snack in the evening, going to something like a fruit, a vegetable, something that maybe some nuts, something that is filling, but not doesn't have that sugary intake, so that you get that well night's rest is going to be also important. And then, finally here, reading these food labels, I think it's important. This is easier said than done. I think the main take homes here are avoiding those things with added sugar, right? Getting sugar out of the equation is probably unrealistic, but we want to avoid those added sugars, right? So all those corn syrup, anything sucrose, dextrose, things like that, we want to try to avoid. So that's something you can quickly look at. I think the other thing to really look at is the protein in your food. So you want something that's higher rich in protein and low sugar, right? So that's something simple to look at a label. If you're deciding, hey, I want this snack, does it have higher protein and low sugar content? That's, I think, something that you can quickly look at a label and determine, is this the best product for you to take? And then, serving size, right? So I think portion control is obviously, a great way to help healthy eating. But I think if you're eating that one third, 1/3 rule, portion control really doesn't make a huge difference, right? So you're kind of following those healthy eating habits. It's okay to get a second plate of vegetables, right? It's okay to get a second plate of brown rice, um, as long as you know, hey, you're not, um, taking majority of one substance, right? So I think portion control, eating a good breakfast, lunch, and dinner is very important. Um, you know, uh, helping reduce this inflammation moving forward. And then, kind of ending here is, sample 1 day anti-inflammatory meal, right? So again, I think a lot of these can be very simple and easy to do depending on what your interests are, but simple things like oatmeals, right? Oatmeal with berries, walnuts, cinnamon, easy way to get your daily fiber for the day. Lunch, adding those plant-based foods, adding some sort of salmon or protein with that avocado that's rich in olive oil, that can really improve your inflammatory cascade. Snacking on again fruit, right? We're switching that, taking out of that candy bar, those chips, and switching it with something that is more healthier, that is, going to reduce that inflammation. And then dinner, again, that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule, right? So that broccoli is that your vegetables, your chicken is your protein, and your brown rice is your fiber. So, keeping that in mind, certainly getting some variation of these different diets is important. But I think it's having these tools, and knowing that the food that we take really has an influence on how we feel, not just only emotionally, but also the way we perceive and the way we feel pain. I think is really the take home here. And so, yeah, I think just really the home point, take home points here is that pain and nutrition go hand in hand. We don't often spend so much time discussing that in the office since we're really focused on, your condition and what we can do to treat the pain. But these are hopefully are some strategies you can start to implement at home, that can, maybe make a small difference in what we're doing in the clinic to help reduce your pain, and hopefully help you live a healthier lifestyle, along the way. And so I think really slow and steady changes, small changes along the way make a big difference long term. And so kind of keeping that in mind is very important that, simple changes can make a big difference in the end game. And so with that, that's the end of the talk. I will open it up for any questions.
Yes, it's Peter. Do you have any suggestions other than the expensive health food stores? It seems to be more expensive to eat well. Do you have any suggestions other than expensive health food stores of anywhere that we can get some food, maybe food delivered, that's healthy food and not quite so expensive?
Yeah, so great question. I think yes, eating healthy. We get kind of drawn to these health food stores for, organic and things like that. And absolutely, sure, organic has its way of natural way without less preservatives. But you know, fruit and vegetables are fairly cheap. You can get bananas at the grocery store. You can get apples at the grocery store for fairly cheap. And so, you don't have to spend a lot of money on getting, natural food supplements and spending a lot of money on the organic products. It's really about, what are you eating, right? Are you really following enough? Are you getting enough plant-based diet? Are you getting enough fiber in your diet? Can we cut out a lot of those, even cheaper sugary foods out of our diet, right? So going to, the health food store and spending so much money on these, um, you know, $80 omega-3 tablets or, these turmeric tablets is not really necessary, right? You can get the same clinical benefits, by, eating a smoothie, right? Drinking a smoothie and kind of getting that same effect. So I don't think there is a need to spend that much money. It does take time. The flip side there is that going to a fast food restaurant, you're instant, you get it quickly, you're able to eat, right then and there versus now going to the grocery store, getting the fruits and vegetables and now preparing it. There is that time I think, associated with eating healthy. So, a lot of times, I'm busy during the week. We have little kids. We try to meal prep on Sundays, as much as we can to set the tone for the week when we do have time. So adding those strategies into your mix, I think, can be really beneficial. Healthy eating is not always expensive, to really answer your question. I think another question came from the text. Should we limit red meat to just a few times a week? I think goes back to the talk. There's no real rule of thumb, right? So, we know red meat, I think in general, doesn't improve your heart health, okay? For the same effect that it doesn't have those anti-inflammatory properties that, say, omega-3s that a salmon would, a salmon protein, or beans would. Um, I do say that if you enjoy red meat, it's okay to eat red meat as long as you're adding those additional things to the mix, right? You're eating a little piece of steak, but now the third of your plate is filled with plants. A third of your plate is filled with, fiber, right? So you don't want to have, I'm going to have red meat, and then I'm going to have now lots of mashed potatoes, and I'm going to also have, a soda to go with that, right? So that's where the diet starts to change. So I don't want to say, red meat is completely out. Red meat, we know, yeah, we shouldn't eat it on a daily basis, but as long as you're adding those other properties I talked about into the mix, I think eating red meat as a source of protein is okay. So just keep that in mind. I think it's harder to cut things out completely, but just adding some of these pro-inflammatory diet substances, I think is really what we should be focusing on rather than cutting out. Are there any other questions from the group? Okay, great. Well, hopefully, that was educational for you guys. I appreciate everyone listening today. We again will have this recorded and shared on our website and YouTube channel, and then look forward to our discussions next month. Thank you.